Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
We are concerned about troubling, irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely
Dangerous to our democracy.
This is
Extremely dangerous.
dangerous to our democracy.
dangerous.
extremely dangerous to our democracy.
Extremely
Dangerous to our democracy.
This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
So in the old days, you used to have this globe that with 180 some odd countries, and a few of those countries had a lot of power, like the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States at various times. But today, you might better look at that globe and say that it's surrounded by huge clouds swirling around the planet. They know no national boundaries. They don't follow any specific sets of laws, and these are the big corporations. They basically control politicians around the world because they have all the money, and politicians always need money to get elected or to run their governments if they're not democratically elected politicians. They control the mainstream press, either through outright ownership or advertising budgets. They have massive amounts of lobbyists in Washington that have tremendous influence on our president and Congress. And they really are calling the shots. They form partnerships with the Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Tibetans, or with the Israelis and Arab nations, with Brazilians and Indians, with whatever country and whatever group of people has resources that they covet. And so for the first time in history, we really have this new form of an empire.
They put on this show that they're bitter rivalries, you know, villains, and they really don't like each other. But behind closed doors, they buddy up for a drink and make deals.
Both the Republican and Democratic parties are owned by the same global elites. And on issues that matter to those global elites, they act as one.
They've wrapped themselves in the American flag, and they've talked about preserving American heritage and principles, and all the while they're working to merge us into a new world order where our sovereignty will be destroyed. We'll lose all connection with our American heritage.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
They say there are two sides to every story. Consider both before you form an opinion. Easier said than done. Look at the conflict in Ukraine. One side is dominating the global narrative. The other side has been proclaimed the villain. I'm talking about NATO and Russia. And while there's a solid case against Russia here, this story too has another side. And as the tellers of the story, we must dwell on and reflect it. Vladimir Putin's aggression is being called out, and rightly so. Invading a sovereign country cannot be justified. But what led the world to the point of this invasion? Leaders in Moscow say they are the aggrieved party. They are the victims of NATO's eastward march, and they're only acting in self-defense. Here's why. Over the past 25 years, NATO has been creeping closer to the Russian border. Former Soviet states have become NATO members. This military alliance has technically absorbed the entire security belt of Moscow. Russia sees this expansion as a provocation. It hurts their security interests and won't end well for both sides, they said. The warnings were clear. NATO ignored them. Call it their myopia or arrogance. They downplayed Moscow's concerns, kept proceeding with new rounds of expansion until things blew up in Ukraine. Did NATO push Ukraine into this war? Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, and today I want to discuss why NATO cannot escape the blame for what's unfolding in Ukraine. First things first, what is NATO? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a security alliance between North America and Europe. It was formed after the Second World War. The goal, they say, was to protect democratic freedom. On the 4th of April 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty was signed. This treaty was simply an anti-Soviet accord aimed at countering any future aggression by the USSR. It established a new balance of power in Europe. It promised all members collective security. That's a core principle laid out in Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. It obliges member states to protect each other in case of a war. It says an armed attack against one ally will be an attack on all allies. Meaning, if one NATO nation is attacked, all NATO nations will retaliate. This allowed NATO members to pool and share their military resources. They built efficient defense capabilities, but there was more to NATO than just defense. It was an alliance of liberal countries, an engine of democratization that was supposed to promote common values and interests, also push back against the rise of communism. Naturally, Moscow saw this alliance as a threat to its interests. In response, it created the Warsaw Pact in the year 1955. It was a counterweight to NATO, the Warsaw Pact. These were the members. Their goal was the same. If one Warsaw Pact member is attacked, all others will defend it. In Russian historical memory, there were 5 reasons why such a pact was justified, 5 major invasions when the West threatened Russian interests. This includes the Polish occupation of the Kremlin in early 17th century, the Swedish invasion of Russia in early 18th century, the Napoleon invasion of the 19th century, and the 2 wars with Germany in the 20th century. In each case, the very essence of the Russian state was threatened. So suspicion and fear of the West took deep roots in Russia. Moscow began perceiving NATO as a tool of American imperialism. And the assessment was not really off the mark. In 1989, the Berlin Wall collapsed. In 1991, the Soviet Union disintegrated and the Iron Curtain was completely demolished. Europe's regional order hinged on one question. Should Germany align itself with the US and NATO, or should it join the Russians through the Warsaw Pact? The US government, under George H.W. Bush, made an offer to Russian President Mikhail Gorbachev. It suggested if Germany became a NATO member, NATO would stop expanding, not 1 inch eastwards. No new members. Today, the US says it made no such promise, that no such deal was ever struck, but hundreds of memos, meeting minutes, and transcripts from US archives indicate otherwise. Nevertheless, Moscow bought the offer. It demolished the Warsaw Pact in the hope that the West would follow suit, that NATO too would be dissolved. But that never happened. NATO refused to cease operations. And to add insult to injury, they kept the door for membership open. Russia saw it as a stab in the back, and NATO kept pushing the dagger deeper. Look at this map. NATO started out with 12 founding members, but since the Soviet Union fell, it has radically expanded eastwards. In 1999, Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic joined NATO. In 2004, there was another wave of expansion. 7 Central and Eastern European nations were made NATO members. Some of them were former Soviet republics. In 2009, Albania and Croatia joined NATO. And the most recent entries were Montenegro and North Macedonia, both situated in Russia's backyard. It does not end there. As of 2021, NATO officially recognized 3 more aspiring members: Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, and Ukraine. Last we checked, NATO was also in talks with Sweden, Finland, and Serbia for membership. So to put it simply, much of Eastern Europe which once used to be part of the Soviet Union, has now joined NATO. And this happened despite Russia's protests and warnings.
You have talked a lot about security guarantees, and now we've seen your proposals. You also say you have no intention of invading Ukraine. So will you guarantee unconditionally that you will not invade Ukraine or any other sovereign country? Or does that depend on how negotiations go? And another question, what is it, do you think, that the West does not understand about Russia or about your intentions? Thank you.
Speaking of the security guarantees and what it will depend upon, or if something will depend upon the negotiations, our actions will not depend on the negotiation. They will depend on the unconditional compliance with the Russian security demands today and in the historical context. In this sense, we have made it clear that any further NATO movement to the east is unacceptable. There is nothing unclear about this. We are not deploying our missiles over at the borders of the US. No. On the other hand, the US is deploying its missiles close to our home, on the porch of our house. So, are we demanding something excessive? We're simply asking them not to deploy their attack systems over at our home. What is so unusual or peculiar about that? So, what would the Americans think if we, for example, decided to come to the border between, say, Canada and the United States or Mexico and simply deploy our missiles over there? Well, did Mexico and the US never have any territorial disputes? What about California? What about Texas? Did you forget about that? But everything seems to have calmed down. Nobody remembers those things, just like the way they remember about Crimea. We try not to remember the situation in Ukraine. Who created that? Who started the crisis? Was that Lenin? Yes, when he declared the Soviet Union in 1922 and then the Constitution of 1924 following his death, was following the principles of Lenin. This is a matter of security, not just history. This is about security. It is not the negotiations that matter. It is the outcome, the result. I've reiterated this many times, and you're well aware that we said not an inch to the east. That was the NATO guarantee in 1990. So what became of that? They fooled us. We've seen 5 waves of NATO expansion. Now they're in Romania and in Poland, and they're deploying the relevant attack systems over there. That's what we're talking about. You should finally understand, we're not threatening anyone. We did not come to the US borders or to the UK borders. No. They came to our borders, and now they're saying that Ukraine will also join NATO and they will deploy their systems there. Or not just NATO, they will simply deploy it on a bilateral basis. They will deploy their military bases and their attack systems. That's what we're talking about. And you keep demanding some guarantees from us. You must give us the guarantees. It is up to you, and you must do this immediately, right now, instead of keep talking about this for decades.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. You think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, Rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, Minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.